Hello, Painful Mass here. I am back after a long break. I'm going to start up my bias series again because I've been reading the book Brain Bugs by Dean Buonamano. I don't actually know how to say his last name. Um, don't worry, I've started up reading the Book of Mormon as well again, so I'll finish that series in the not too distant future. My videos will still be slow coming because I have my general exam in 3 weeks. But I finished the paper for it, which was the most time consuming aspect, which is why I sort of took a break in the first place. This series will be a little different than in the past. So before I just took a well known and studied bias and explained it, then I gave some examples, which included how a religious person maybe was experiencing that bias. Since I'm just going to be describing things in this book, they won't necessarily be named biases. So what I'll try to do is explain the experiments that show that the brain bug exists, along with references to those studies. And then I'll give an example of how religious people may be religious due to that brain bug rather than due to rational argument or evidence. Since it's been a while since I've done this series, I'll remind you, like always, that these are aspects of the human brain. One shouldn't be ashamed of or embarrassed by making any of these faults. There's nothing wrong or bad with that. These are just biases, and everyone makes them all the time. The important thing is to admit that it is possible you are making one or more of these mistakes and try to examine whether or not it is happening. The only time something bad happens is if you find you are making this mistake and then intentionally go on believing something you have no unbiased basis for. This is how we come to believe false things. So I strongly encourage you, if you are a theist and I point out that maybe one of your main arguments for believing in God is based on one of these brain bugs, you really need to take a good look at whether or not that's happening. So onto the book itself. The first two chapters are probably really familiar material for anyone that has paid attention to popular science in the past 10 or 20 years. It just explains how the brain stores memory, what the different types of memory are. It talks about priming, which I discussed in my arguments with integral math, so let's not go there again. It also discusses false memories, which are interesting, and maybe I'll come back to those because certainly false memories could be attributing to why someone believes in God. Um, let's see. So, the key point of the first chapter that I'll talk about is that we form memories through what is called a neural net. And all this means is that when you form or recall information, the neurons around this stored information also fire as well. So you can't just recall some very tiny piece of data like a computer can, because all your neurons that are around that are going to be stimulated and bring up other information. So um, if we consistently link two things, for example, and there's just way too many examples for me to. This example isn't that good. Okay, I'll just put it that way. So, in the English language, bread and butter are linked. Um, and people have done studies that show this. And of course, in other cultures where bread and butter are not linked, they find out that there's not a neural net linking these two things. So since those two words are linked so often in English, what happens is inside of your brain, these two actually become physically linked through a neural net. Thus, without actively training your brain to unlink some things, they actually will probably stay linked basically forever. And the usual phrase for this is neurons that fire together wire together. So you consistently link things, they wire together, and then it's hard to separate these two words or ideas. So I won't even bother giving studies for this one because the book goes through several, and there are probably hundreds that are easy to find online. This is pretty standard knowledge at this point. So let's get on to what this has to do with religion. Well, suppose you are a baby and your parents bring you to church every week. The atmosphere at church is probably warm and friendly and loving, all sorts of things like that. So before you are even aware of anything, a neural net starts forming in your brain. And the words God, religion, Christianity, Jesus, anything that has to do with your particular religion that your parents are bringing you to, get associated with those feelings of warmth, love, and friendliness. A neural net physically forms in your brain linking these things. And these are very positive feelings. So, for instance, later on in your life, maybe you're outside of church, you're questioning whether or not God exists, and you decide to pray on your own. And you want to find out whether or not you can feel God. If you, whatever. Uh, so, what words would come up in your prayers? And uh, obviously, the words Jesus or God, or at least these ideas, are going to be circulating around inside of your prayer to try to, feel God or see if God actually exists, or any of those sorts of things. So, due to the neural net that was formed when you were a tiny baby, before you even knew these things were being linked, your body will then experience some sort of warmth or love feeling just from the word God being mentioned. Now, note, this is entirely due to this pre programmed neural net. It is a physical phenomenon completely explainable and repeatable in experiments with other non religious words. At this point, most people interpret this feeling as God's presence. I mean, you pray and you get a physical reaction similar to love out of it. This is what people mean when they say they know God exists because they can feel him in his heart, or whatever phrases your particular denomination uses. So this is pretty cut and dry evidence in most religious circles for the existence of God. It is so common, it even has a name. It's called the argument from religious experience. But now we see that this isn't evidence at all for God. It is just a so-called brain bug. You falsely attributed this feeling to God. This is why people who are raised atheist and don't have this neural net established can sincerely pray and try to get this same experience, but fail to. So I'd love to know if there are any religious people out there that think of this as their most important primary piece of evidence, who after hearing this will honestly admit that this feeling might not be God. Because you really need to consider that is a possibility. I think anyone who is being honest in their arguments would have to admit that this is basically a death blow to the argument from religious experience. Once you've lost the argument from religious experience, well, most religious people have nothing else of substance. That argument seems to be the standard main argument that I hear. So, well, that's all I have for today. I hope you like this new Brain Bugs series. It's going to be fun for me to do. Hopefully it's fun for you to listen to.